Welcome, lovely viewers, to another wonderful and interesting aspect of Science Made Easy. Once again, my name is Makion, and I'll be your teacher for today. We're going to be looking into another interesting aspect of a lesson as we did in our previous video, and I hope you do remember. But this time around, we're not going to look at the flower in terms of the structure anymore. We'll be looking at an aspect of it that further continues the life process of flower. I hope you're ready. So let's get started. We'll be looking at pollination today and how it happens, the various types, and possibly other interesting aspects or facts about it too. By the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to explain the term pollination. The learner should also be able to describe self and cross-pollination. The learner again should be able to mention at least 3 features of a self and cross-pollinated flower. Then he or she should also be able to give some adaptations and even examples of self and cross-pollinated flowers, and also give some features, at least 2 of them, for insects and then wind pollinated flower. Flowering plants we learned in our previous video that are also called angiosperm, and they go through many processes right from the young part before we get to see the plant grown into a matured plant. It actually starts from a place, starts from a process, and these are the main stages in which the flowering plant goes through. You have pollination, you have fertilization, you have fruit and seed formation, you have dispersal of fruit and seed, we have germination of the seed, and then we also have maturity. But like we said earlier, we're going to be looking at only pollination for today's lesson. So this is an image or a summary of the life processes that a flowering plant goes through, from pollination, which we're looking at today, to the maturation of the seeds and the seeds germinating to growth, forming another flowering plant, and all of that. Now, pollination, it simply refers to the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or a different flower, but they should be of the same species. Now, the reason why we're emphasizing on the same species is that you can't use the pollen grain, as you stated, from a plant like an orange to fertilize a plant like purple. Though it's pollen grain, of course, and then it will fall onto the stigma of that of purple. But because they belong to different species, we do not classify or to not even help in the process of fertilization. So in the picture, as you can see here, you see that the pollen grain has been transferred by what we call a pollinator, which we'll look at briefly, from the anther, here where the pollen grains were produced, to the stigma. Yeah, so that transfer of the pollen grains from this anther to this stigma is what we refer to as pollination. Now, there are many types of pollination, but they are all categorized into 2 main, which will be our emphasis for today's lesson. The first one we're going to be looking at is what we call self-pollination, also known as autogamy, which refers to the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So in this case, what we are looking at is the pollen grain will move from the anther and then it will settle on the stigma, but it has to be of the same flower. An example of such plant that undergo this type of pollination includes maize, oil palm, coconut, orchids, pea, sunflower, tridax, etc., etc. So if you look at this image here, we can see that this is the anther, And the anther, we learned from our previous video that it produces the pollen grain, which contains the male sex cell. When it's transferred from this anther to the stigma, but on the same flower, we refer to this as what? Self-pollination or autogamy. And then this image further illustrates that. So you see the pollen grain, this small tiny powdery substance you see here, moving from the anther and settling on the stigma, but it's on the same flower, qualifying it to be self-pollinated flower. Now with a self-pollinated flower, before you can actually go through this, there are certain adaptations you need to have, and that's what we're going to be looking at shortly. We have the characteristics of a self-pollinated flower or self-pollination. Some of them are: 1, the flower usually opens after self-pollination. What it means is that before pollination, the flower is closed. It does not open. And one of the main reasons why this happens is to prevent cross-pollination from happening. Because we want, or it has been designed for it to self-pollinate itself, or self-pollinate, it will close so that no other pollen grain from another flower will not settle on it. And then this makes it to be classified as what we call cleistogamy. And in cleistogamy simply refers to flowers that actually are closed after or are closed during the fertilization or pollination process. This is cleistogamy. Then a self-pollinated flower is also bisexual. We learn that bi means two, and then sexual refers to the male and female part of the flower. So what it means is that a self-pollinated flower has both the male and the female parts on the same flower. So what? Bisexual. Then the stigma and the anther of a self-pollinated flower, they mature at the same time. One cannot mature before the other, because if the stigma matures before the anther, the pollen grain will not have developed by that time, so it cannot self-pollinate. And likewise, the anther cannot develop before the stigma, because the pollen grain will be developed, but the female part will be underdeveloped, so there can't be fertilization or continuation of the process. So this aspect where the male and female mature at the same time is said to be homogamy. Take note of these words. Why do we have some plants undergoing self-pollination? What are some of the advantages? 1, the seed production is assured because there is no agent of pollination needed. We know that no matter what, this flower, this plant will pollinate. We don't need any external features to help us with it. And then the transfer of pollen grains occurs over a short distance because they are all in the same flower. It occurs within a short distance. Then cross-pollination. This refers to the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of a flower on a different plant, parts of the same species. So the same species is very key. An example of such plants that undergo this, we have pawpaw, sunflower, apples, pumpkins, daffodils, grasses, maple trees, etc. etc. So this diagram here, or this image here, we see that we have one flower here, we have another flower here. So this bee, the pollinator, will come to this flower, and the process of sucking nectar will pick a few pollen grains, and then as it moves to this flower to suck nectar, it actually drops the pollen grain on the stigma. So the process of moving the pollen grain from this flower to this flower is what we refer to as cross-pollination. Now, characteristics of cross-pollinated flower. We have 1, the plant bearing the male and the female parts are on different plants because it has to pick the pollen grain from somewhere to another place. One part will have the pollen grain, and another part will have the stigma. So those plants normally have the male and the female parts separate. Then we also know that the reproductive parts develop at separate times. So you can have the male part, which is found on one plant, developing earlier than the female parts, or the female part developing earlier than the male part, because they occur on separate plants. and this is what we call as dichogamy. Dichogamy. Dicho means separate and gamy means marriage. It's a Greek term. Now, when the stamen develops before the pistil, this is said to be what? Protandry. And then when the pistil develops before the stigma, this is said to be what? Protogyny. So protandry, protogyny. Then the flowers are unisexual. Unisexual in the sense that it only bears the male part or bears the female part. Because they are cross-pollinated flower, having pollen grain being transferred from one flower to a different flower, each flower bears a specific sexual part. It can either be the male or it can be the female. And the flower is also what we call sterile. Sterile in the sense that because the other part or the male part or female parts are not developed, it cannot fertilize itself. So you have a flower with the male part developed, female part are not developed, so it cannot self-fertilize. At the same time too, we have a female part developed, male part underdeveloped, so it cannot self-fertilize. Advantages: we have a lot of genetic variations, so we have different kinds occurring. Then the offspring are greater resistant to disease, meaning because they occur at separate places under different conditions, the disease that will affect one plant at one site will not affect the other plant. And then there's no inbreeding in the sense that because the male and female part don't occur on the same flower, you cannot have self-fertilization, and therefore you will not have inbreeding, and then hence weaker plants are avoided. Agents of pollination. Agents of pollination refers to the humans, animals, wind, water, any possible means by which pollen grains are transferred from an anther to a stigma. Example, we have birds, we have bats, we have insects, which have different colors, butterflies, bee, flies. All of these helping for pollen grain to be transferred. And there are two main types of pollination under the agent. We have the insect pollinated flower, and then we have the wind pollinated flower. Each of them has their own distinct characteristics. So these are some of the images of the agents of, we have the bee, you have the butterfly, you have the fly here, you have the bird here, plus other ones, including the wind. So some of the characteristics of insect pollinated flower, we have, they are large and conspicuous. That means they are very obvious, they are very big, you can see them. They produce a lot of nectar. They have nice and sweet and attractive scent. They produce very small pollen grains. They don't produce so much pollen grains, and then their stigma is sticky. And the flowers are usually large, like I said, they are large and conspicuous, and they have brightly colored petals, and they also have short filaments. So the catch here is everything here, the opposite part of what you have here happens to be the characteristics of wind pollinated flower. So in the same way, for wind pollinated flower, they are supposed to be small and inconspicuous, and they produce little amount of nectar. They have little pleasant scent, and they produce a lot amount of pollen grain. So this is virtually the opposite of the insect pollinated flower. Now, after pollination has occurred, what happens to the pollen grain? Let's see. It goes through a process we call fertilization. And fertilization simply means the process by which the male sex cell fuses with the female sex cell to form a zygote. So what happens is that once the pollen grain falls on the stigma, it absorbs water, then it breaks and develops a tube which grows through the style and then all the way into the ovary to the ovule. And then when it gets to the ovule, it releases the male sex cell which fuses with the female sex cell in the ovule, and then after that all these parts will die and fall off, and the ovule will develop to form the seed, and the ovary here will develop to form the fruit. So this is more or less like a summary of the whole thing. Yet again, we come to the end of another wonderful class. This is a simple assignment for you to do. I hope to see you again, and don't forget to click on the subscribe and the like button. Until next time,